Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. Today we are going to be using one of my new stamp sets from the Vintage Love release, and this is called Love is a Rose. There's 3 large images in here and we are actually going to be watercoloring them today with my Derwent Inktense Pencils. You can use these one of 2 ways. We'll talk about both. But if you're going to use them with the pencil direct to the paper, you do want to make sure they are sharp. They sharpen just like any other colored pencil. You don't get the watercolor effect until you add the water. So you can sharpen them regular. So I am going to be stamping these out. I am working on Canson Monteval watercolor paper. You can use whatever your preferred watercolor paper is. I have used this one for years. I like it, enjoy the way that it works, and it's within my price point. So I am just double checking. I thought I was going to use 2 of these open books. I stamped 2 of them, but I actually will ended up doing 1. So I'm going to stamp these in Honeybee's No Align coloring ink. So that way when I'm done watercoloring them, they will appear to be as if I just sat down to watercolor them and I didn't have an outline to go off of. Now, I personally prefer to have a bit of a darker outline. So even when I'm working on regular cardstock, I stamp this twice with watercolor cardstock because it is a bit more textured. I ended up stamping it 3 times in order to be able to have an outline that I was comfortable following. Especially since these have like maybe some smaller parts or some more detailed areas. I wanted to make sure that I was going to be able to put them together the way that they are in the stamp. Also, you'll notice that window. That window is from my other stamp set, which is Blooming View, but I'm going to use it. They work well together. So here, I like to watercolor a bit more neat. So in order to do that, what you see me doing here is showing you how to blot the water off the base of the bristles. So when you put your watercolor, or when you put your paintbrush in water, it swells up. If you take that directly to your paper, you're going to have too much water and you're not going to have any control. So if you blot off the bottom of the bristles, you can see if you play that back again, that the paintbrush actually shrinks down. It is still damp. There is still moisture on the brush, but it's at the tip. It's not completely saturated and going to make it so you have no control. That is the way that I prefer to watercolor most of the time. You will see one in here where we do a wet on wet technique, which is a bit different, but for the most part, this is the way that I will be watercoloring with very little water. So the first way that you can use these colored pencils is the way that I originally talked about. You can take them direct to paper. That's what I'm doing here. And then I'm going in with a slightly damp paintbrush and I am just blending out that pigment. Now here we're watercoloring the pages. So we're not looking for a ton of super saturated color. We're just looking to add a little bit of shading and shadows. I know that it looks dark right now. Don't worry. By the time we add all of the other colors in, it will not look that dark. But I like to start with my lighter areas so that way as I'm building up around them, I'm not worried about picking up a darker color with my paintbrush and spreading it into my lighter areas. My lighter areas will be completely dry. So for these pages, that's what I did. I went direct to paper. This I find is a little bit harder to blend out. It also leaves you a bit more texture. It picks up kind of the texture of the paper a bit more. So if you like that look, a more textured watercolor look, then by all means, this is going to work really well for you. I prefer to actually take my paintbrush to the colored pencil. And so here, when I do the cover of the book, which honestly, there isn't much real estate here because it's a flat open book. I'm going to start this way and you're going to see how when I put the water down, it's not a really bold blue. It's just a very kind of light wash of blue. And in order to get more intense color faster and easier, I am going to then switch over to picking it up right off the pencil. Now you do need to have a damp paintbrush, and you can see how much bolder that color is picking it up off the paintbrush and then putting it onto the paper. you don't, again, at no time during this do you want to have your paintbrush completely swollen with water unless we're doing that wet on wet technique, which will not happen until we get to the window. But if you're looking for this style of watercoloring, and not everybody is, some people like looser, some people like it to have more blooms. This is really kind of like tight and buttoned up, this version of watercoloring. And so here, I know that I already done the flowers. Don't worry, I'm going to show them to you, but each one of these images has a set of flowers. I left this part in to show you that even after this is dry, like I'm going back in and I'm adding deeper, darker color. This is a theme that's very hard to show without showing you everything from start to finish. But basically, I'm always looking at my images to see if I need to go back and add in another layer of color. And that's just something you're going to want to pay attention to as you're going. Now, because I use such little water with this particular technique, the areas are drying almost instantly. Here, I'm doing the paper on these books, and I'm doing it with the like paintbrush to tip of the pencil method, just to kind of show you that this does work whether you put it down on the paper and then blend it out, or if you pick it up off the pencil. It doesn't have to be super intense color if you pick it up off the pencil. It's just easier to get super intense color if you're looking for it. So with that said, this video is almost 30 minutes long. By the time that I was done with all 3 cards and uploaded the footage, I had almost 5 hours of footage. That's a lot for me. And the reason is because the watercolor does take quite a bit of time for me. Now, the more you watercolor, the faster you get. But for me personally, especially doing something like this where I'm doing multiple layers of color and it's a super like tight design, and I'm watercoloring 3 different images, it does take me quite a while. So, you're not actually going to see the making of all the cards today. You'll see the finished products at the end, but really what we're going to concentrate on today is just the watercoloring. Because my original intention was to show you a different technique, which was like selective heat embossing and how to do that, different ways to do that. And I still want to show you that, but I'm going to have to show you in another video. So make sure you stay tuned for that if you're interested in seeing how they all kind of came together with their very kind of vintage feel. But I thought that it would be smarter to start with the watercoloring and do that video first, because until they're watercolored, I can't build the cards with them. So I didn't want to do the original theme of the video as I had intended it, and then have everybody be like, where did these images even come from? So I thought it would be better to show the watercoloring first, and then in the part 2, we will show all of the fun techniques that we did for the selective heat embossing, as well as the more kind of vintage. And it's not like a true vintage, it's like a vintage modern kind of vibe that we have going on with the cards. So when I was choosing my colors, let's talk about that a little bit. The open book is the first one that I did. Obviously, what you can see is I've done the paper and the cover of the book. You saw that. I played around quite a bit to get the colors that I wanted for the flowers and for the leaves. This particular watercolor medium, which you could do this with any watercolor medium, and do it the same way where it's kind of more tight and buttoned up. I have videos where I have done that as well. I hadn't used these in a while, and, trying to make the most out of the supplies that I have, but you could absolutely do this with like true watercolors. It just takes me a long time, because with markers, you know what I mean? You lay it down, it's like immediately dry. And yes, the color is buildable, but you have more colors to kind of work with. For this particular set, I think I have the 24 or the 36 set, but some of them are really, really bright, like super bright. And I don't know about you, but I've never really seen anything that was like vintagey feeling that had really bright colors. And so I did have to kind of play around with them to have a little bit more of a muted palette, which is what I was going for. And so I will share those things with you. Please know that if you're going along and you're not exactly happy with where your watercoloring is, a couple of words of advice: walk away, let it just completely dry, and then see if it needs anything else. Don't be afraid to add another layer. Like some of these, you can see the bottom book. I was not happy with the bottom book, and you can see I keep going back and adding more green because the spine of the book is going to be just a little bit taller than the like base of the cover, like the top of the cover. And so I keep going back in, and as it dries, adding more and more pigment. And even after I move on to the window, just like I did with the previous roses where I went back to it, I came back to this stack of books and was adding more color. So don't be afraid to add more layers. Let your layers dry in between, because watercolors always dry back softer than what they are when they're wet. So that way, you know, you can be sure that you're happy with the way that your colors are looking and the dimension that you're achieving. So I went with the bottom, more of like a mossy kind of green color. I think the color I actually used is called leaf green. And then I went with that same kind of navy. Now, I wanted something for the top that was different than the florals. And so I was thinking, like, you know, how am I going to make this happen? And a friend of mine suggested burgundy. But I didn't have a burgundy. I had, I think it's called Shiraz, which is the color of the actual roses, that kind of pinky color. So in order to create my own burgundy, I am going to layer, but I'm going to layer colors that are not the same. So I'm starting here with, it's called Bark, which is a very cool brown. And I'm going in and I am putting this color down as my base. And then I'm going to go in with the Shiraz, which is that kind of pinkish, it's not red, it's a pink color. Pinkish magenta kind of color. But I'm going to go in and I'm going to put that over top of this brown. And that is how I am going to create the look of burgundy. So even though I don't have all of the colors, I mean, I don't even think I have all the ones that Derwent makes. Even though I don't have them all, you can layer your colors to stretch what you have to make new colors and kind of change them up. So again, I am going to go through, I'm going to show you, I love this little bookmark that's kind of hanging out of that middle book, the little latches on the book. Like I tried to add some very kind of vintage details when I was drawing it. The scroll work on the side of the spine for the larger one. I just thought that they, like, little details like that I love in my card making, and so no surprise I also love them in my illustration. So I chose to do the little clasps, more of a gold color. Gold is a theme you're going to see throughout all of these cards. But I got the like the spine color. I laid down the bark first, and then I put, I think it's called baked earth over top of that in order to have it just to be a hair more gold. For the actual clasps, I used that baked earth color and then also mustard. And then I just went in and used the true bark color to kind of outline that scroll work, and then add some shadows to the clasp, as well as like the two little like locking dots that you would normally see. From here, we're going to move on to the window. I'm going to do the window in the same kind of goldish color that we just did the clasps in, adding some shadows underneath the panes with that darkest brown bark color, and then I'll go in with that baked earth, and then again the mustard color just for a little bit of brightness. But you can obviously do this any color that you would like. So yeah, there was so much footage. And I know that it took, like, this isn't my style. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that it's not pretty or that I'm not happy with the way the cards came out. I am. And I think vintage is totally coming back. It was like, that look was very popular when I first started card making, which was almost 15 years ago. So I do think it's coming back around, just very much like now we see like 90s fashion in the stores and stuff, which I think is wild. I was doing a what was it? Was it book fair? I can't remember. I think it might have been book fair. I was doing the like PTO stuff, or in some parts of the country it's called PTA, for my son's school, and one of his classmates had on like a Nirvana t-shirt and a grungy flannel and like holy jeans, and I was like, oh my gosh, my youth is back. My youth is back. Also saw some like plaids and crop tops and things like that were very reminiscent of like Clueless when I was a kid. That was a very, very popular movie. So it is totally wild to see that stuff come back. But just like clothing trends come back and things like that, or hairstyles, trends come back in card making, and vintage is for sure making a comeback. Now, there is a bit more of a modern spin on it, which I do love because it gives me a chance to play around with some other things that aren't particularly my style. I'm a very clean and simple card maker, but I think you'll see in the finished product that there is still some of that clean and simple present. Elements of it, but also, to incorporate that kind of vintage style, which is super fun and, gives you an excuse to kind of play with something new, which is only going to expand your crafty repertoire. All right, let's talk about this wet on wet technique. All that means is your paper is already wet and you're bringing wet pigment to it. So here I've chosen, it's obviously a much lighter blue. This one, I made a little puddle on my glass mat, and so I'm putting down clean water, and then I'm dropping in that lighter colored pigment. And then for some of them, I'm just leaving them wet and not really dropping in any pigment at all. And this is going to give me the opportunity to create a little bit of a sky outside this window. So the areas that I'm dropping in blue will be very soft and they will bloom into that wet pigment. When I am going directly to the tip, and I apologize, this is so far off to the left, it's because I didn't want to get the rest of it into my puddle. But when you see, I'm going to go in and pick up pigment directly from the pencil. And this is going to be those bright blue pops of sky that you would see. Now, it's going to be hard to not mess with it, but truly, like, drop the color in and then just kind of let it bloom on its own. And you'll see in the center there, these clouds kind of start to take shape with no help from us at all. It's just because we've added some pigment kind of in different areas to be that blue sky that's popping through. And then the clouds will come together on their own. I love, love, love the way that the sky came out in the background. And I chose at the end to make this a happy anniversary card because the combination of the window and the open book and the roses were totally giving me wedding vibes. Here is where I told you, remember, I wasn't happy with the way that this looked, and I'm always going back and checking those images to see what I can deepen up or darken to give myself some more dimension. Now, some of these areas don't necessarily matter as much because, like I said, the intent was to do the heat embossing, selective heat embossing. And so some of these things I am going to go back in, and you'll see that in the next video where I went back in and added gold heat embossing to just some of these areas that are the accents. So you won't be able to see the paint underneath that, but the book was not one of them. Like the base cover of the book is not one of them. So now we're into the actual florals. I colored all of them the same. I watercolored every single one of these the same. And it just made sense to show it on the bird cage, because on the bird cage, there isn't much else that we're going to color. So normally I would tell you, you can't work next to two areas that are wet. And for the most part, I'm not. Like, I've put down the pigment, I've put down the darkest color, but I am moving the pigment around in different areas. But because we're using so little water, I mean, it's so little, none of it's bubbled up. It almost dries completely right away. We're just using enough to move the pigment around. Because it dries almost instantly, I don't really have to worry about them bleeding together. I can kind of go in with my little damp paintbrush, move the pigment around, maybe do one other section, and then I could paint one that was directly next to that first one and it would not bleed. So if you are using more water than that, that's totally fine. I feel very out of control when I have more water, especially in smaller images. Not everybody feels that way, but that's where I'm at in my creative journey. So I'm not willing to risk using that much water. I prefer it to be much more controlled, especially when I have smaller, more detailed images. So as I'm going through, I am able to see, where I can add some more pigment in, as well as, working on all of the petals individually. So the same rules apply. Normally I am using alcohol markers. I typically do not use colored pencils, because if you think 5 hours of footage is long, you should see me use colored pencils. It takes me so long. But anywho, basically, I'm going to go in, and almost all of it is, it's going to be very similar to just a one layer wash. However, you cannot just go in and fill the whole thing with water and then just drop paint in so that the whole thing has a base layer, because you'll lose those no lines and then you won't have any idea where to put your petals. So that is why I still go in section by section, and then I slowly build up the dimension so that different areas have darker portions. And again, with the florals, I am consistently going back and adding in any darkness if I feel like it needs some more dimension. So generally the tips of your petals are going to be a little bit lighter where they're tucked in. They're going to be darker. That's where the majority of your shading is going to be. However, it's your card and it's your project. And you don't have to maybe watercolor to the depth of color that I am. I did one in this same Vintage Love set. And I think maybe I'll put that one up on Monday, maybe. But anyway, Dawn Woolslagel, who is an amazing artist, and I'm not just saying that because she's my best friend. She's fantastic. But she has a release with Honeybee in this set, and it's called Eternal Love, and it's 3 clusters of florals, and it's some morning glories, some camellias, and some cabbage roses, and they're beautiful. And can I just tell you how excited I am that her style of stamps is back on the market, and then I can play with them again, because I am thrilled about it. But anyway, one of the cards that I did using that set is just a very simple watercolor. And I really didn't do any shading at all. I did no shading on the leaves. I picked one color and that was it, and dropped it in. And then for the florals, I think that one is the cabbage roses. I just used saltwater taffy and abandoned coral, and I just dropped them in. That's it. So it doesn't always have to be this in-depth and this involved to be pretty, because these are more detailed images, because they are, there's a lot more going on. I don't have an embossed outline to catch any of my paint. That is why I am taking the time to be super meticulous. So let's talk about some color theory, okay? So I put down this leaf green, which is much more mossy. However, I wanted there to be a differentiation between the leaves. So I also added in some yellow And I'm not moving it around the whole thing. This is sped up, obviously. So I dropped in some yellow, and then I also dropped in this super bright green. This one is called apple green, and it's very, very bright. But because we have that leaf green down as a base, we can add in that bright green and tint it without it being too crazy. Speaking of tinting things, I have not lost my mind in painting these leaves orange. I'm painting the leaves orange because the teal that is included in the set that I have, it's called teal green, but it is so bright, you guys. It's off the charts. It's so bright. And I wanted the leaves to be teal, but I wanted them to be knocked back. So in color theory in general, and it doesn't matter what medium you're using, but you can knock back or desaturate a color by shading it with its complement. Teal's complement is orange. So, well, it's a yellow orange, but anyway, it's orange. So by putting down the base layer of orange and then layering my teal on top of that, I can desaturate the color. Anywhere that I want it to be a little bit darker, I'm just going to go in, add another layer of orange and add another layer of teal on top of it. And again, it's going to give me a teal, but it's going to be much more desaturated. So that is what I did for the smaller leaves on all of them. They all have orange and they all have that teal color. Now, I did go in and do the details. So like you'll be able to see some lines on the leaves where I went back in and put in the stems and things like that. And for the most part, I just chose a darker version of the color. So for the bigger like rose leaves, I used the leaf green, very saturated. And then for the teal ones, I used the teal with a little bit of orange. Again, not a lot of water, very saturated pigment. For the birdcage itself, you don't have to color in any of this. You could leave all of this outline, but I wanted to have a couple of little details. So I chose to color in the handle on the top, and then I chose to color in the bottom of the cage. I still want it to look like it's wired, but I chose to color in the back bottom of it, and then the two lines that hold the little hearts. In order to create kind of a natural highlight, I added darker shading on the outsides, and then I pulled it into the center so that the pigment in the center was lighter. This is just going to add to the round appearance of the cage. And then just like we've been talking about everything else, I am going back in and laying down more pigment if I need it to make things darker. So with that said, we're almost to, well, I'm doing another layer because I want it to be darker still, but we're almost to the end of the video. And the end of this video is just going to be the die cuts. All of these have coordinating dies. And so once everything was dry, I did cut them out with the dies, and then I proceeded to build the cards. This is all of the watercolored images together that you can see. And then I will go in and die cut them, and then we'll look at the cards together. Again, there will be another video coming out with how the cards went out. I normally do not do this, but by the time I was done editing this portion of the footage with the watercolor, it was already a 30-minute video. So there was no way I was fitting all of it in. So here they are in their entirety. You can see there's one image on each card, cut out with their die cuts. And I did use several of the other. I used the Vintage Flora, background stamp. I used what is that? It's actually the leaves layers that I really like that one. But anywho, so these are the 3 completed cards. I will be back, I promise you. I will be back to show you the building of the backgrounds and how to add those metallic accents when you just want to add them in very specific places. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.